Thanks for having me again, everyone. And I'm going to focus on my experiences again with some major brands that I worked for or on in my corporate career in terms of marketing, and some of my own businesses. So I'll be telling some stories and some examples. Building a brand is deliberate and layered, as both Dana and Sabia have eloquently pointed out. A brand is how your customers recognize and experience your business, and it is about them and their experience. Also, if you're not doing it deliberately to kind of architect what you hope will become the way they recognize it or experience it, they're going to be doing that anyway. So whether you're being deliberate or not, it's happening, and your brand is happening in the eyes and minds of those consumers. So best to be deliberate, and it layers over time. Dana really illustrated that well. Industry context. So let's start there and talk about the context that your brand lives in. I'll tell you a little story about Lovell Gallery, and it's called "Beware Those Who Enter the Art World Dressed in Orange." I did this. So I had come from a corporate world, and I knew a lot about branding. I was a big shot, right? So all my years in Lovell-Miller and in brand market research, and then brand marketing for their biggest brands. So I knew what I was doing, right? And then I entered the art world, and I sat down with all my brand knowledge and designed myself a logo for Lovell Gallery. So I got one part right. So in the art world, most of the galleries I noticed were named after the founder of the business, or named after the kind of director or owner of the gallery. So Lovell was my maiden surname at the time. So Lovell Gallery was a good name for the business, but then I made it orange. Now that was a deliberate choice at the time, because my experience of the art world, entering into it for the first time, and many others, and I did a number of interviews, and there was congruence around this belief, this feeling that I had. You go into an art gallery, especially the higher up, sort of bigger ones, more established ones, and you feel small. They make you feel uncomfortable. There's no one that you can see to talk to because they're in some office at the back. There's no prices on the walls, so you would need to ask, and then you feel awkward about having to do that. So the entire thing, and it's dead quiet, and it's these 4 white walls, and so if your shoes squeak, you kind of, you feel awkward. And that felt wrong to me. It felt like, why is it so unfriendly? Why is it designed, the experience designed to be so, to make people feel small and make people feel stupid? And I didn't want to do that. I set out to be a brand that broke that mold a little bit in the industry. And I wanted to be a friendly, approachable, warm, exciting brand. And so orange is the perfect color, because orange is all of those things. It's exciting and fresh and warm and friendly. And so I made my brand orange. And I put my sign up outside, and I moved my desk to the front. I got a coffee machine. I trained my staff as baristas, and said, make people the best cappuccinos in town as they come in the door if they want them. So we did things differently. And then I applied for my first art fair. Now, participating in an art fair in the art industry is a big deal, and it's about the only way a gallery gets ahead. And I was declined. And I later, by pure chance, having a conversation with the director of the Zeitz Museum at the time, mentioned it, and he said, oh yes, I was on the committee, but your brand was orange. So I said, that's the reason you declined my application? Yes, he says, you can't have an orange brand in the art world. And so I went back and I changed it to black straight away. And then I realized, I sat looking at it and realized I was the only one with an orange brand, and it was stupid. I mean, it is stupid, right? but it was an unwritten rule. It was a uniform. It was a dress code that I had violated because I didn't know the industry context well enough. Changed it to black, and suddenly I was acceptable. And I thought, I'll do the orange in my, I'll live the orange as a value rather than breaking the industry norm in terms of the brand, because they didn't get past the color to get, they didn't get through the door because they just said, oh, that doesn't look right, finished. So a little story. So look at the industry and make sure you get your foot in the door and you're not breaking all the conventions too quickly over silly things like brand colors or brand shapes and things. It is quite important. I've learned that over time. And think ahead and think from inside your customer's head. So I'm going to tell you another little story about how to be arbitrary. I created many years ago with a friend who was a graphic designer, and we created a sort of sideline business at the time and in branding, and she was going to do, I was kind of great at ideas and she was great at design. So we thought we'd create this business, and we were too clever because we created the name Arbor, means tree, and tree. So we created this arbitrary creative concepts. Of course, it either means tree, or it means it's arbitrary. Like, who wants to be arbitrary? Like, you're not going to be taking us seriously. So it didn't, anyway, whether it was the name or whether it was just because it was a sideline business, it didn't last very long. But when I look back on it, I think, what a silly name to call anything. If you Google bad brand names, and I recommend you do it, you'll find lots. So here are a few that I've put down here. Jitters. What do you think Jitters is a brand name for? Coffee shop. And there are quite a few coffee shops called Jitters, which it kind of, it makes sense because too much coffee gives you the jitters, but it's negative. Who wants to remind people that there's this bad effect from having too much of their product? It's just not such a smart idea to go negative. I'll Cut You is a hairdressing salon. Oh, very clever and cute. Things like Curl Up and Dye also fit in the same category, hairdressing salons, but they're really nasty, right? That is not a nice thing to be saying to your customers. So it might be clever, but it's not so nice. Stubbs, they make prosthetics. Same thing, like really? Master is a bait and tackle shop, which, so you see the sign, Master Bait and Tackle Shop. No, bad idea. And then just to kind of make you feel not too bad and realize that even the really, really big companies do it. Cadabra, as in from abracadabra, was the original name of Amazon. So Jeff Bezos named his brand Cadabra and then realized sounds like cadaver and nobody gets that it's abracadabra, and then they kind of missed the A. He wanted to be at the beginning of the alphabet, so he just scrapped it and renamed it to Amazon. And Quickster was a brand launch by Netflix. So Netflix decided to split their business out, and Netflix retained the more profitable streaming side of the business, and they split off and created this new brand for the DVD on demand that kind of post you your DVDs, and they called it Quickster. Like, as you want it, it'll be there as quick in the post. Quickster. Anyway, it lasted 1 month and then they canned it, and they look back on it as one of the worst mistakes they ever made and a really bad brand name. So just some research that you can do around brand names, but try not to be too clever. Just call it something that people will get and understand and it won't offend anybody or feel stupid over time. Here are some tips. So I've given you the source on this page of these, where I drew these tips from, and also a free resource in terms of a kind of framework to test out and write different names. On the do side, do make names that are suggestive of your business. They should give people a clue as to what you do. Brands that are meaningful, brand names that are meaningful in terms of what you do. Imaginative names, names that have legs. In other words, they're not going to limit you too much in the future, and they could, so think ahead about where your brand might pivot to or expand to, and make sure that the name can take it there. And then brands that are emotional, that have some emotional component or are uplifting, and don't create brands that are spelling challenged. You often see this where people take something and then change the spelling of a commonly understood thing by putting X's in, or it's just causes confusion, especially around the domains and whatever. Be very careful not to make copycat brand names that sound too similar to your competitors, or very the same as a brand but in a different category. It's just never a good idea. Brands that are not, names that aren't, don't make them restrictive. In other words, they shouldn't limit your future growth. So for example, if you're very specific about kind of, you know, the vegan food suppliers, and maybe later on you want to expand to beyond vegan foods, then you're going to have a problem because you've put that in your name. Don't be annoying like I was with arbitrary, and don't choose a name that's too tame. In other words, it could be anything. It's so broad, it could just be absolutely anything, any category. It doesn't mean much. And a brand that has the curse of knowledge is one that would only be understood because you're an insider in that industry, because it's so jargony, and otherwise because you're then kind of restricting your target market a bit. And don't choose brands that are hard to pronounce. My husband has a beer brand. He has a craft brewery, and he called it Garagista, which means garage owner in Italian. But when you write Garagista, people called it Gangsterista, Garderog. Pronunciation became a real problem, and then people really battle. So some tips. And know how your customers use their brand. And I've deliberately put the word their brand there, not how they use your brand, because it is their brand when they are the customer of that brand. This story is about, I was in charge of Amstel Lager, when I was at SA Breweries. And the story is called The Big Green Surprise, how to not curtail the Amstel Lager Cohort. So I was in charge of this brand for SA Breweries, but the brand was not owned by breweries. The brand was owned by Heineken in Holland. And so breweries had the kind of rights to it in South Africa. And breweries were the only country in the world that launched the Amstel Lager brand in a quart. So I had at the beginning of my career in breweries, I was in charge of research, and I was in charge of premium brands research. And so I did all the research on launching this quart bottle. And I later on moved across to marketing department and ran the Amstel Lager brand. So it was at this time, the quart bottle, the green quart bottle, had been a huge success. In fact, it was so much of a success that the Heineken team was worried about it. And they came out to South Africa and said, you need to find a way to curb the growth. You need to slow the growth in the quart down, because our quart bottle research had told us that there are all these negative associations in the marketplace with quart bottles, with just that pack size. you're seen as a drunkard, violent person, low class, all these horrible negative things of quart drinkers and quart bottles. So they said, we don't want those associations transferred onto our brand. So we want to retain the bulk of our volume in the 330 ml bottle, which has all these positive associations. So curtail the quart. And so I set about doing another whole set of research with our company economists, and we worked out that pricing was going to be the best way to curtail the growth of this green bottle. And we did price sensitivity studies and worked out exactly the price point at which people would buy less of it. And then we launched the new price, and lo and behold, the volumes of Amstel Lager, completely against what the research told us would happen. Volumes of Amstel Lager quart went whoops, right up. And what happened was the consumers in that quart market, suddenly, because there was this price difference, were able to use the price as a badge to say, I'm a guy that can afford. I am premium person amongst my quart peers. And so volume in this green quart went up. So I was in trouble for causing great volume increases and had to do a lot more research. It was really interesting. So think about, in terms of branding, there's this whole world that the consumer lives in, that they're using your brand to do certain things for them that you might not have thought about, to tell other people a story about them by being seen with your brand or by using your brand. And be aware, or try and be aware of what the stories are they are telling their friends and peers by using your brand, and how you can influence those. It's a really interesting thing. And then in terms of target market versus consumers, some of you have been struggling a little bit with this. You might have users of your product, and then you might have an actual target market. And the target market is the one person, as Donna said, it's that person you visualize, who you can see, the persona. That is your target market, because that defines your brand marketing efforts. That's the person you picture when you create the ads or the whatever. But your consumers might be much wider than that. So after after running Amstel Lager, I got promoted to running Castle Lager, which was the biggest brand in the portfolio. And they had a problem at the time. They had done an update of Castle Lager just prior to me taking it over, and they'd updated it too far. They had lost their consumers by changing the target market, and changing the target market too far away from who the consumers were. And then they created these ads, this ad called Whirlwind. I've set the link on the presentation so you can look at the ad later. So the ad was this young, funky, hip, happening guy traveling around the world at high speed on planes and trains and whatever. And he was so unrecognizable to the consumers that they felt like the brand wasn't theirs anymore. And so the brand went into decline across all 9 regions. And I was brought in when it was at like 30% decline in all 9 regions to fix it. So we went back to the consumers and brought that target market closer to what it was that they recognized and loved the brand for. So it wasn't just about them. It was about their belief in this brand and what it stood for. And it had stretched too far away from that. So the brands have to evolve, of course, but don't outpace the brand history, and don't outpace the market that uses the brand too far. It must be aspirational, but not unrecognizable, or not feel like it's not for them anymore. So speaking of brand evolution, I'll just bring it back to my brand, my journey in my little while on Art Fundi. So this is about, these are the evolutions of my logo. The first one, and in real terms, the evolution happened as I kind of grew up a little bit in terms of the brand, and as I had the ability to do it better. So the first one I designed myself, and it looks like it. But it got us launched. I'd also made our first website, and it was pretty horrible if I look back on it now. But it got us launched and got us off the ground. And the second one, I had a freelancer. I gave him, we did some sort of trade, and he improved the logo for me. And the one that we're currently using is an update of that, which has been done by a really great advertising agency. And so the brand, it is a journey, and it will evolve. But as long as you keep everyone on the train with you, you'll be fine. I just want to end on a few quotes. Jeff Bezos said, "A brand for a company is like a reputation for a person. You earn a reputation by trying to do hard things well." And Walter Landau said, "Products are made in a factory, but brands are created in the mind." And I'll end on this one, Jessica Walsh. "If no one hates it, no one really loves it." So that's also about the personality that you need to put into the brand, and not being afraid to let it be a little polarizing. Don't make it so bland that it appeals to everyone, but also no one in particular. Thank you very much.